getting ready for Bills-Chiefs, and here to help us do that, as he does every Friday for games, senior producer from NFL Films, Greg Cosell, joining us, also co-host of ESPN's NFL Matchup Show. And Greg's weekly segment is presented by Scott Lawnyard, an official commercial site work partner of the Buffalo Bills. All right, Greg, it's the matchup everyone was hoping for, and here we are, Allen Mahomes. And I want to start with this because we always talk about how Spagnuolo always throws something different in the works. I think his approach differs as well. Last year's divisional playoff, he blitzes Josh just 18% of his dropbacks. Week 11, he does it over 35% of his dropbacks.
Yeah.
He doubles the number of blitzes. What do we think he's going to do at home this time around?
Well, I think that question gets to how the Bills choose to play offense. I'll be the first to admit, Brownie, Matty, that I was totally surprised by their offensive approach against the Ravens. I really thought that it would have to be much more of a pass game. And by that, I don't mean a Josh Allen game. I just mean they'd have to drop back and throw the ball more. And they clearly, in their mind, felt that they could come out and play physical football. I mean, in the first half, they had 10 snaps with Anderson. Gilliam played 11 snaps in the game. This was not the way most people think a Josh Allen game as a passer. There's always run game elements with Josh, certainly in the playoffs. So I guess the reason I started with that is that leads to what's going to be the down and distance situations in this game. Now, obviously, there's always going to be some third and longs. We know that. You can't get through a game without some third and long plays. But I think the nature of the game and the flow of the game, Brownie, will dictate how Spags goes about his pressure concepts. I mean, look what he did last week against Houston. Okay, obviously they were ahead, and Houston had to throw the ball. And in the fourth quarter, he blitzed 10 times alone, and 3 times in a row, as you may recall. I'm sure you looked at the game. 3 times in a row, second down, third down, fourth down. So I think the game flow often dictates how he goes about blitzing. But I would argue that there's no better situational blitzing defensive coordinator in the league than Spags.
You mentioned Buffalo's offensive approach being a little bit of a surprise against the Ravens. When you look at the Chiefs' defense and Steve Spagnuolo, what he can do and what he can send at Buffalo's offense, what do you think their offensive approach is going to be against Kansas City on Sunday?
Yeah, I mean, there's a part of me that I go back and forth on this, man. I was obviously wrong last week. Okay, so there's a part of me that thinks that Spags, who's been doing this a long time, is not going to let the Bills line up and physically run the ball. And when I say that, I don't mean they're going to have no success, but, control the pace and tempo of the game by running the ball. But then there's another part of me that looks at what happened last week and think I was wrong. So, I that's a hard question to answer. I can't imagine that the Bills are going to step totally away from kind of the way they've played all season long. Sure, have there been Josh Allen moments and games where it has to be Josh Allen being the driving force, and is he more than capable of that? Of course. But this team has kind of evolved into a pretty balanced team. Brownie, we've talked about that all year long. I mean, this is not just give it to Josh and let him drop back and toss it all over the yard or let him run around. I mean, this team lines up, they run the ball. They played far and away more snaps with 6 offensive linemen than any other team in the league. I can't imagine that whole philosophical approach is going to change on Sunday at Arrowhead. Do you think it's going to dramatically change?
No, I don't. Matty and I were just talking about this in the previous segment because in Week 11, the Chiefs defense did a good job of shutting down that run game. Cook only had 20 yards. He ran better in the red zone and had 2 rushing touchdowns. But their run game was somewhat thwarted by this Chiefs front. I don't think that's going to happen now because I think the Bills' offense and the run game has reached a new level of effectiveness and efficiency. And proof of that is the 357 yards they ran against the number 3 and number 1 run defenses in football. I mean, I know the Chiefs are still a top 10 run defense, but they're not as good as those guys.
Yeah, and I'll be the first to admit, like I said, that I was wrong. I didn't think that would be able to happen, but, that's kind of what happened. So, I don't think they're going to, let's put it this way, based on what they've done, particularly the last 2 weeks and throughout much of this season, guys, there's no reason to believe that Joe Brady, Sean McDermott, Aaron Cromer are saying, oh, my God, we can't run the ball. There's no way they're going into this game saying that.
Well, looking at Buffalo's offense a little bit more, what are their strengths against the Chiefs defense? Breaking it up between running the ball or passing the ball, where can they beat the Chiefs defense?
Well, I think, Maddie, when it comes, look, the run game's going to be the run game, however they choose to do it, whether they decide to do it with Alec Anderson and run a lot of 6-0 line. We know there's going to be some, I guess the degree we don't know, whether they decide to play Gilliam, whether they decide to do it at a 3 wide receiver. However they choose to do it, we know they're going to run the ball. To me, the question becomes how they choose to throw the ball. Because I think, and I'm just trying to be realistic, from tape study, they don't have a true number one outside receiver that you feel like, hey, he's the guy, and that's the guy that the Chiefs better line up and stop, or else they're going to have a tough time. So to me, their pass game has to be highly schemed, and that's when you start getting into a lot of the minutia and the subtleties of what do they anticipate coverage wise from the Chiefs. What the Chiefs have evolved into over the last 3-4 games, McDuffie has become solely an outside corner. He was playing inside, and then about 3-4 games ago, they made a change. And now that Connor is back in particular, he's their sort of hybrid slot corner safety. So McDuffie has been almost exclusively an outside corner the last 3-4 games, and he plays as much or more press man than any corner in the league. And in fact, Steve Spagnuolo is a big believer in having his corners play press. So I think it comes down to schematics. Yes, you're going to have to win one-on-one sometimes, of course you are. But I think it's going to come down to some schematics as well in how you go about attacking what you anticipate from their coverage.
Bills have killed man coverage this year, though. I mean, you're going to play press man for the majority of the game. You're in for it, I think, against this Bills offense. Yes, they don't have a true number one, but they have a coordinator that can scheme up separation, especially against man coverage, as he's proven already this season. I mean, they hung 47 on the Jaguars in week 3. I mean, they were boat racing the Lions playing man coverage. I mean, okay, you want to play that, I'm all for it. The interesting thing for me, Greg, is if McDuffie is going to line up exclusively outside, Shakir's going to have another big day. I mean, I like Shamari Connor. He's a nice player, but he's not a true slot corner. I mean,
no, and I agree.
Shakir's going to shake him out of his shoes.
And I think you're 100% right. The other thing I think you're going to see a lot of, and you saw it week 11, right? That was the game this year.
Yes.
The other thing you saw a ton in week 11, and I think you're going to see it again, is a ton of movement before the snap of the ball. I mean, Allen had 45 dropbacks in the week 11 game. 37 of them featured pre-snap movement, a shift, a motion, or both, and 19 of their called running plays had pre-snap motion or shifting. So I think you're going to continue to see that, see how the Chiefs react to that, see if they're going to play man. Are they going to stay locked? Are they going to start to play releases? Are they going to adjust? You want to find these things out relatively early in the game, Brownie, how the Chiefs are going to react to movement before the snap of the ball.
And looking at that Week 11 breakup, it was like 40 pass attempts to 31 rushing attempts if you look at how the Bills went about deploying their offense. But switching it to Buffalo's defense, we just heard earlier from our head coach Sean McDermott that safety Taylor Rapp is going to be out with that hip and back injury. So that means Cole Bishop, the rookie safety, will be starting. He's been able to get first-team reps all week, which I think is helpful. What have you seen out of Cole Bishop this year when you've watched back the tape?
Yeah, I mean, I like Cole Bishop. I mean, the big question is just going to be the fact that he hasn't played a ton of football in the league, and he's also playing against a team that uses a ton of pre-snap movement. So it's just a matter of they'll work through that all week in terms of how they're going to handle that. Are they going to adjust? Are they going to play coverages? They're going to play two shell where they don't necessarily have to adjust to pre-snap movement. The Chiefs have become a very, I don't want to say odd, but a very interesting offense relative to what probably a lot of people think they are. They throw the ball a lot. Mahomes had something like the second or third most dropbacks in the NFL this year. But they don't throw the ball down the field, and Mahomes has been one of the absolute worst quarterbacks this year when it comes to completion percentage and throws 20 or more yards from the line of scrimmage. They are not a vertical passing team. They are a schematic horizontal passing team, and they're good at it. But that's the way they play. So, they don't really attack over the top. Mahomes has completed 26% of his passes on throws 20 or more yards in the air from the line of scrimmage. It's the worst in the NFL by far. So that just has not now people listening could say, "Oh, it's Mahomes. He's great." We know Mahomes is great. We're just talking about the reality of what these teams are right now. We know Patrick Mahomes is great. It's not a knock on the player. This is who they are right now. And the run game has not been very good over the last 4 or 5 weeks. So offensively, and I hate to say it this way, but it's true. They seem just to make plays at those critical moments, but they've not been really a big time offensive team this year.
Yeah, and that's what I wanted to ask you next, because in the Week 11 game, they lined up 3 tight ends and tried to play bully ball with the Bills. And this was before Pacheco was back from his injury, so it was largely just Kareem Hunt. And I find it interesting, too, and maybe you tell me what the film shows you, but Pacheco, each of the last 5 weeks, has seen his snap count go down. So clearly the Chiefs believe there's something missing from his typical explosive, sudden style of play. Maybe it's just not there right now, and they're leaning on Hunt more. How much of a detrimental effect has that had on their run game?
Well, they're different backs. I mean, Hunt is a good back. He's always been a good back in the league.
Yes.
I guess the larger question that you're really asking is how much are they going to rely on the run game? Are they going to see the run game as a necessary part? When I say necessary, look, they're going to run the ball, but what is going to be the degree to which they do that? Are they going to feel like, hey, we've got to line up and have a really meaningful run game? We need 45% of our offensive plays to be runs? Or is it, hey, this is a Patrick game. He can sustain offense with his passing and with his legs, although it was fascinating in the Week 11 game, Mahomes had no rushing yards. And we know that the Bills, they will spy on third down. They did against the Chiefs. They spy at every third down against Lamar, and they have a tendency to play man coverage behind that because there is a spy. So, that's a hard question to answer, but their run game has not been very good over the last month, 5-6 weeks, Brownie, as you just pointed out. So, it's going to be interesting. I mean, I heard a stat. I assume it's true. I didn't check it, so maybe I'm wrong. But it was during one of the telecasts. I thought I heard it that Xavier Worthy's only had 4 receptions of more than 20 yards this year. I don't know if that sounds ridiculously bad, but it wouldn't surprise me just watching their tape.
Well, I think it just speaks to the horizontal nature of their offense that you referenced earlier. I think he's a part of that too. We didn't see a lot of ball distribution last week from that offense because it was pretty much Kelce and Worthy. Mm-hmm. Is there still a disconnect in your mind from what you're seeing on film between Mahomes and Hollywood Brown? Have they just not gotten enough reps to really connect, or do you just think it was a one-off last week that he wasn't more involved in the passing game?
Yeah, that's a hard question. I mean, like I said, their pass game has kind of evolved to what it is. That doesn't mean they may not take a shot or two. I mean, I think they will, but they just have not really been a vertical passing team. Now, Hollywood Brown can be an intermediate receiver as well. They only threw 27 balls, just like the Bills last week only threw 20. I think there were 23 dropbacks. Because actually Josh did not have one scramble. He was sacked once and he had 22 throws. So there were only 23 dropbacks. The Chiefs did not have many dropbacks either. So, these teams are not, I think, the way some people might think of them. So I don't know what the Chiefs offense is going to look like. The Chiefs, quite frankly, have been much more of a defense-based team this year. They have a really, really good defense. They're phenomenal situationally on defense in those sort of critical high-leverage situations, whether it's in the first half or the second half. Spags is as good as there is in the league. So, this has not been the Chiefs offense that a lot of people probably just think because it's Mahomes, they're going to score 30, 35. They haven't been that team, Brownie. So I don't know. I don't know how they see their passing game going into this game. I mean, it's going to be what it's been, but I don't know if they feel like, hey, we've got to start pushing it more down the field. don't forget, they also are still playing Tooney at left tackle. And while he hasn't been bad, there are snaps every game in which he gets beat one-on-one.
That was going to be my next point. There's also the offensive line part of this equation that has led the Chiefs, in part, not being able to play like the Chiefs of the past, not being able to play like that high-flying offense or seen success on the ground as of late. And Joe Tooney last week allowed 5 quarterback pressures and 2 sacks against Houston. Looking back at the Week 11 game, the Bills had 2 sacks on Patrick Mahomes. He also threw 2 interceptions. How does Buffalo's defensive line match up against Kansas City's offensive line right now?
Well, the big question there is, what's Andy Reid going to do? I mean, Andy Reid does not really want to keep people in. So they let Tooney, even against Will Anderson and Danielle Hunter, let Tooney block one-on-one. And he had some bad snaps. Now, just being honest, Anderson and Hunter are terrific. I mean, I think Rousseau's a good player. I'm not sure he's quite at that level as a pure pass rusher. You know, Von Miller's actually had a lot of good snaps over the last month as a pass rusher. So, you know, I think they have to win some of those. Now, it's not a matter of sacking. They're not going to sack him 9 times, but I think, you know, you have to speed the game up for any quarterback. As great as Mahomes is and as dangerous as he can be, you know, making plays with his legs, you still got to speed the game up. You can't let him be comfortable. You can't let him just work through whatever it is he's working through. So I think that's absolutely critical because Andy Reid does not want to keep people in. And we saw that last week. I mean, you know, Tooney, look, I give Tooney all the credit in the world. That's so hard what he's doing. I'm not sure people realize that. He's not a tackle. And the other point that has to be mentioned in relation to that is the guy playing left guard, Caliendo, he's really not an NFL starter. So that's another matchup that at some point in this game, they've got to control that matchup and win that matchup because he's not truly a starting left guard.
And then last one for you, Greg, the Travis Kelce conundrum. He's playoff enemy number 1 for this team. He's got 5 touchdown receptions in 3 playoff games against the Bills. And once again, playoff Travis showed up last week against Houston, and he just has an uncanny knack of finding holes in zones and knowing where to sit for Patrick to be open for him and be available. Is there anything that can be done to effectively bracket him on the inside there? I don't even know if that's really possible.
Well, the big question, and you know, people always assume, why don't you just double a guy on every play? But I think the larger question then is how that impacts the rest of your defense. It's not just one guy. So, you know, can you in given situations double him or bracket him or, you know, do something that you feel you're taking him away? You can. You know, someone like Bill Belichick's always been a believer that that's what you have to do against big-time receivers. And maybe that is something you'll see. But there's also 1 week here to prepare. Now, granted, these teams do know each other, but there's 1 week. You can't totally step outside of the way you play because the last thing you want is to have someone make a mistake in a critical situation because it's not something that you've done all year. You know, you put in maybe a couple of special things, but you can't totally go away from who you are because, you know, one of the things that, in fact, you could argue for almost all these teams that are in the Final Four now, but certainly the Bills and the Chiefs, there have been very few mistakes. You know, they don't turn the ball over on offense. They don't make a lot of mistakes on defense. They play pretty clean football. And the last thing you want to do is not play clean football in a game like this.
We've talked about a lot of matchups within this game, but what does this game come down to, Greg?
Oh, Manny, there's so many things you could answer, you know. I mean, that's one of those, I mean, you know, and by the way, sometimes in these games, there's something we don't count on that happens, you know, or there's a player that, you know, that all of a sudden has a big game. Like, you know, just so we're not talking about it from the Chiefs' perspective. Let's say all of a sudden Keon Coleman has 6 for 120. You know, I mean, you know, things like that happen in these games.
The sound of that.
And, you know, the kinds of things you can't, there's no way in talking now you're going to sit here and say, well, Keon Coleman's going to have 6 for 120 this week, no problem. But sometimes that stuff happens. And it just, you know, that's why sometimes in these games teams win and lose because, you know, players do step out of the kind of the ordinary or what's expected.
Greg, thanks for the time. As always, enjoy the games this weekend, and we'll catch up with you next week.
All right, appreciate it, guys. Going to enjoy this weekend. It's going to be fun.